to breaking the grade.
Toi Hershman was born to be an entrepreneur. She knows when to fight, she knows when to quit, she knows when to pivot. Much like the great entrepreneurs of our time, she does it all with a positive attitude and a smile that can light up even the darkest of rooms. But Toi has experienced her fair share of dark days that have forced her to battle personal and professional demons from elementary school until today. By listening to our show about this most inspiring entrepreneur, you will learn how Toi battled an eating disorder as a child and still battles OCD today. Why quitting her career as an engineer still haunts Toi today, but actually was the right path for her. And how EntreEd, the association she is the CEO of, is transforming the lives of kids interested in being entrepreneurs like Toi. Breakers band together as we talk to one tough cookie, my friend Toi Hershman. Toi, join us. John as well.
Hey, Toi.
Hey, Josh. Hey, John. I'm so excited to be here. This is super cool.
Good.
So,
where
where
we
would
are
you
glad.
like me to start?
Well, we'll lead you. I know that you're used to, you've got your own show, which is great. That's actually how we met. And but we have a format here that I think is really helpful to the other entrepreneurs out there in the world who are going to get to know more about you as a person, and they're going to get to know more about EntreEd, and both of those are very inspiring. But let's start with the OCD. Let's just get it out there. And you wrote here, this has been through adolescence and early childhood. So talk to us about it.
Yeah. So I have OCD, and that's a word that is terribly used in the media these days because it conjures up images of people, organizing their soups by alphabetical order. That's not my thing. My thing was, thinking that people were going to die and somehow I would inadvertently cause this to happen, which, can be very scary as a child, thinking, if I walk up the stairs wrong, my dad might not come home because he'll be in a horrible crash or something. And it just kind of morphed and grew. And because of that, I think I had a lot of issues as a child with struggling with the anxiety and the OCD. It really stomps on your confidence. For those of you out there that have ever experienced it, it really just rips all of your confidence in yourself out. And that makes for a tough time growing up. I fortunately was very good academically in school. As a good little girl with OCD, wants to please everybody, I excelled and still struggled. It hemmed and hawed the whole way. But, I knew I was going to college. I knew that was the goal. So I kind of just powered through. Many therapists, lots of stories there, but I managed to get into college. And because I was very unsure of myself and not like anybody that had an idea that seemed good, I was going to do that thing because I couldn't figure things out on my own. And so I had a physics teacher. I was really good at physics. I loved physics, but he said, yeah, you really don't want to study physics. You should study this thing called mechanical engineering. And I'm going, what? What's mechanical engineering? He said, well, it's just like physics, only you get a much higher paying job at the end. And I said, oh, okay. Go home, tell my parents. Boy, did my family like that idea too. So here we go, engineering. And I got into a college in South Carolina, which was pretty easy for me because my grades were good. So I got into Clemson, a little school in South Carolina, and with a little known football team. Maybe you've seen them a lot. And somehow, it was actually the hardest thing, the hardest degree I've ever done. But I got out of there with honors. At the time, as a woman with an engineering degree, the jobs were just flying at me. So lucky for me, I got an amazing high-paying job in Charlotte, North Carolina for mechanical engineering at a nuclear consulting firm. And I did that for a little while. Didn't light me up. I did another nuclear job for a while. That didn't light me up. and it just I went through several different iterations of engineering, just not feeling like I was in the right place.
But in that whole story that you've kind of told us from childhood, adolescence through, there's elements of gritting, standing back up, pivoting. So, I want to turn to John a little bit and say, well, these are some really important characteristics of the entrepreneurs that you see on a daily basis, right?
Yeah, I really relate to the story. First of all, I happen to organize my soups, so I want to just open with that. I also live on the third floor of my home in North Philly, and I can't tell you, Toy, how many times I go up and down, up and down. Did I lock the door? Did I lock the door? Did I lock the door? So I'm kind of that way as well. Definitely diagnosed with ADHD, so I'm kind of on that spectrum. But I also know that I can look at that and other entrepreneurs who I work with that have some of these conditions and say, how do we look at that through an asset lens and not a deficit lens? How do we really think about kind of the attention to detail, if you will, instead of saying that it's an OCD, and say, how can we nurture that? How can we leverage that? How can we turn that into a strength and not so much, a liability? And that's the whole, entrepreneurial challenge as I see it, which is extracting the talents, strengths, and skills out of someone and really nurturing them in a way that can deliver and build value. So I very much relate to your story. I talk a lot on my entrepreneurial journey. I share that I'm a big fan of the Michelangelo quote: "If you only knew how hard I worked at my craft, you wouldn't be so impressed with what I created." Well, my quote is, if you only knew how many times I failed or pivoted at entrepreneurship, you wouldn't be impressed with my occasional success. And I think that's a key theme here when we start talking about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial education. And that is, how do we overcome adversity? How do we deal with perseverance and dealing with adversity and overcoming adversity and pivoting with strength and with our head held high and our shoulders held, our shoulders back. So I want you to know I relate to your story and can carry a lot of these stories into many entrepreneurs' journeys.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because it wasn't until I grew up in a time where that word entrepreneurship didn't mean anything apart from starting a business, and it was only for the business ed students, and it was never I was never given entrepreneurship or talked to about entrepreneurship. And it wasn't until I started working as a consultant that I went, oh my goodness, I actually am not crazy. I'm just an entrepreneurial thinker. And that
Yeah,
was this
definitely.
big light bulb that went off. After I left engineering, I went and decided I was going to take a break because I was basically miserable. And my mom was a teacher, so I thought, oh, I'll go try that. I'm just take a break. I'm going to substitute teach, see if that's different, and I can always come back. So I went and substitute taught for one day at a middle school, and the principal calls me down at the end of the day, and that situation threw me right back to high school. I'm like, what did I do? I'm obsessing in my head, like, what did I do wrong? Oh my goodness, and I go into his office and he offers me a full-time job starting the next day.
Mm, mm.
So that was,
Which is, that's an amazing, amazing how the mind can remember those specific things, right? And then, amazing how I would imagine you guys have minds like mine, like the people who are listening to this, who do what Toy did and make up these stories. Like, you're done one day and I'm done as a teacher. No, one day and you've shown somebody how much they believe in you. And so that's a really cool story. And remember, like, fear is a liar. Fear is a total friggin' liar. But some moments
And
that you do
also,
have.
Josh, avoidance is fear's best friend. We have to remember that
Ah,
too. A lot of lessons learned there.
you want to toss one in there, Toy?
Since we're all doing the quotes, that's right.
put me
Yeah.
on the spot like that.
I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit, and we'll, talk about your son.
Okay.
I have a daughter. John has two sons. So talk about another kind of situation you faced where you dealt with it. There was no avoidance. There's a lot of fear, and you made it through.
Yeah. So, well, after I started teaching, yada, 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 I became a career tech principal, which was super cool because that's where entrepreneurship started. I started getting it. And then I did that for a little while. It was the coolest teaching principling experience ever. Uh, but I had my first child and the school was a little bit far away. So I thought, and I worked at night too. So I thought, I can't do this. And I stopped. And that's about 3 or 4 months later, I started consulting and got into working with EntreEd and all of these things that we'll talk about. But I had my second son during that time, and he was normal, wonderful, wonderful young man. And if I start crying, that's just what's going to happen. But he was not even 2, and he went to bed on a Friday night as a normal, almost 2-year-old, and was basically paralyzed the next morning. I got him out of his crib. He fell down. I thought, oh, he just slept on his legs wrong. They went and got a misdiagnosis. And so he continued to get worse and eventually was ambulanced to the big hospital. And he had something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is extraordinarily rare. When it does happen, it's usually people in middle age. And it was like somebody said he could have gotten struck by lightning twice. The odds were that low that he would get this thing, but essentially he got a virus, and instead of his body doing what it's supposed to do, it kind of freaked out, and it eats some of the myelin sheath off of your nerves, which if you have a lamp and you have a lamp cord and you cut the cord in one little place, the lamp goes off. If you cut it in a million places, the lamp is still off. And so there's usually a good prognosis with this, but there's no telling if it will completely heal, if it'll be chronic. And then he went through a series of what they normally use to treat, which is an intravenous treatment, and it did not work. And he was continuing to get worse. Like they were afraid at some point, the fear is that you won't be able to breathe because you can't move your body. And it goes from like bottom up. So he got to the point where they had to put him on a ventilator, and he had to have a plasmapheresis for 5 days. And the most horrible probably week of my entire life. It was just laying there, not sleeping, watching this ventilator go up and down and up and down and up, and just awful. But he came through that. He was under anesthesia for a good part of it and kept waking up and punching it was like, he's the toughest dude ever.
Wow.
But he got through it. We tease him about having other people's plasma, and
Go ahead, say it. It's fun.
We tell him he's down with OPP, other people's plasma. I wasn't sure if that's appropriate for video.
Of course.
Anyway, he's good now. He did come out of it. It took him. He had a wheelchair for a while. He had a whole year plus of treatments and therapies and inpatient therapy. And but he now is a perfectly normal 10-year-old with all the sports and this amazing calmness about him that I don't know if that was because of this experience, but he's like stone cold. He can get through anything and takes everything with a grain of salt. He's just super cool. But
yeah, talk about Viktor Frankl, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's pretty amazing. I was on a business trip when my son was 7 months old, and I got the call, JJ's sick. Oh, okay, keep me posted. Next call, this isn't right. Next call, doctor, urgent care. Next call, John, you need to get on the next flight home. What? This thing called RSV. Next thing I know, I'm walking into the hospital room at 7 months old, seeing my 7-month-old gasping for air in the tent. Like, I thought this was a cold. Also fully recovered, but you never forget those moments. And I can totally relate to 5 days of just staring. Is he breathing? Is he breathing? Is he breathing? And I'll never forget I too get kind of choked up. Happened to in the Georgetown Hospital in Washington, D.C., a woman pulled me aside and said, "Did you go to Penn?" I said, "Yeah, I went to Penn." "Did you know Lara Vecchiarello?" Yeah, I know Lara. So my best friend in college was her best friend in graduate nursing school. And she said, I got your son. And I said, and she held me and she said, I got him. I got him. And I'll never forget that. My mom's a nurse. Best friends are nurses. I used to sit on the board of the School of Nursing at University of Pennsylvania. And it's the care providers, the teachers, the mentors, the advisors, the people that put their arms around you and say, you're good, we got you, that becomes so, so critically important in life. And I'm sure you had that, Toi, during those 5 days. Clinicians and doctors and people who said, hey, we got you.
Yeah, I had one nurse that came to, I work out a lot, and she knew I was having a freak out. We were there for a long time, and she came in and probably like the third or fourth day, and she gave me a badge. And I'm like, what is this? She said, it's my employee badge to the gym. Go to the gym. So when your husband gets here, go to the gym. And that's what I did. And then I had our admitting doctor, shout out to Stephanie Sisler right now. Our admitting doctor was that doctor for me. And we were in a teaching hospital, so we had lots of doctors. I was really happy about that. But she was finishing up her residence, and she was the one that calmed me down. We're going to handle this. And wildly enough, this hospital is over an hour away. She ends up being the pediatrician in my town years later. So she's now my son's pediatrician.
I don't believe in coincidences, Josh. I don't.
Right. Guys, we're lucky enough that our daughter's 8.5. We haven't really experienced anything like that other when she was born. She was born a month early. But my father was diagnosed, if we're all sharing, with something called limbic encephalitis, which is, much like what Toi described. There is a website called rareshare.org where people go and they commiserate about, rare diseases. Well, this one doesn't happen to be on it. That's how rare it is. And I can remember being at Georgetown, because that's when you're in the area, that's where you go, to Georgetown Hospital. And this doctor, which I don't think was the best thing to say, but describing my dad's brain as a forest, and that a brush fire had gone through, and that he was never really going to be able to think the same way. So for me, it was thinking. For Toi, it was potentially walking and moving. For John, it was breathing. My dad is better. It was never the same. We all were never the same. But, what the point that I'm trying to make here is that when your business, like mine at one point, loses $350,000, you can get over that. When, the designer comes back with not exactly how you had planned for that ad to look like, you can get over that. So we have been through these things so that we can get over technically the little things that happen in our business. And I think we're built a different way, and you have to see these things as opportunities, and not to knock us down. So that brings us to more talking about EntreEd, which Toi, we could do a whole show on your time at EntreEd, but tell us about EntreEd. And then I think it can be inspiring to people about the journey you've had with EntreEd, which honestly hasn't necessarily been easy, but now you are sitting at the top and leading it.
Yeah. So EntreEd, after I was consulting, I got a call from a dear friend of mine who was now the CEO of EntreEd, and I worked with him when I was consulting. I worked with him actually when I was a principal. Awesome guy. And he brought me into the organization, and I was already getting there with the career tech and understanding what lights students up, and this, experiential learning and discovery learning, great stuff. And then I go to my first meeting as his, second in command at EntreEd, and I was blown away because I'm going, these are my people. Thank God. Like I said, I didn't realize I was an entrepreneur. And it was so incredible to hear the stories of how they were impacting students in a way that's, building those entrepreneurial mindsets, but it's also just the way you should think. It's the way that it makes any subject more relevant, more important, more meaningful to students when you're bringing in, I feel like like if you have STEM or innovative, innovative things in your classroom, entrepreneurship is the next question. If you're not doing it for a reason to get it out there into the world, then why are you doing it? So it brings that relevance. So EntreEd is the National Consortium for Entrepreneurship Education. And what we are is we are a convener of all of the great things in the entrepreneurship education space. We do a lot of teacher professional development, which is, I believe, the coolest teacher professional development around, because we don't just grab the business ed teachers. We like them too, but we know that, that's impacting a certain number of students who've already sort of decided that they're going to go into that like business ed path. But, you give me third grade teacher, you give me sixth grade math teacher, you give me your PE teacher, and I can help those people put entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial mindsets into their classroom. And what ends up happening is it begins it's like this little fire, right? So it's this little spark. A teacher will do one thing in a classroom, bring in, an entrepreneurial project, bring in a speaker, but it starts this different this shift in the classroom, and then ultimately the shift in the school, where you're bringing in those mindsets all of the time. And that's what we talked about before: the perseverance, the grit, the resiliency, the self-efficacy, confidence, leadership, teamwork. I could keep going. But that's what EntreEd does. So we bring together teachers and educators of all kinds, and also people who provide great curriculum. We look at what's out there in the world, and we know what's good. We have the national standards for entrepreneurship that several states have actually adopted in their plan. And it's just bringing this network and this community together so that when somebody wants to do entrepreneurship in their classroom, they can come to EntreEd and go, oh, here's this wealth of resources, and here are these great people in this community of practice that can help me get started. And that's essentially what we do. We do some research. We do student events when we get really lucky. We're about to do a high school entrepreneurship 2-week-long residential camp, which is going to be awesome. It was so awesome. At the graduation ceremony last year, I ugly cried for every student. It was ridiculous.
I've seen videos, many videos, because Toi and I do some work together, of your events. They look like rock concerts. The people are having such a good time. You're getting everybody so into it. So John, obviously entrepreneurship near and dear to our hearts. But, just can you talk about what EntreEd is up to, and maybe what they're up against, as well?
Well, first, let me start by saying I say this a lot, Josh, near and dear to my heart. Not only entrepreneurship, obviously, but entrepreneurship education. So I've worked very closely with Steve Mariotti and the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, a program that I know you're aware of. And one of the things you just said, Toi, that really hit me, and I totally agree, is we're not learning entrepreneurship. We're doing entrepreneurship. We're learning by doing. And so one of the biggest elements of NIFTY, the Network for Teaching Entrepreneurship, and I want to know if you agree with this philosophy, is not just talking and teaching what the entrepreneurial mindset is, but teaching through storytelling, teaching through experiences. And one of the things that NIFTY did, and I helped them work on this, is create the archetype of an entrepreneur mindset or an entrepreneurial mindset. So we would have students in many Title I underrepresented communities take a survey, answer 30 questions, and then spit back to them, I am Oprah Winfrey, or I am Steve Jobs, or I am Lakshmi Mittal. And this was a really interesting one, because you'd see the students who says, I am Steve Jobs, because they know that name. And then another young man over here would say, I'm Lakshmi Mittal. And they were like, who's that? Well, Lakshmi Mittal, when they learned, slept on dirt floors until he was 14 years old in a rural town of India. And now he's the third, fourth richest person in the world because he worked hard. He came up with a differentiated product or solution. And when you see these students light up with this notion that I can do that too, the power of possibility, you can start getting into inventions and coming up with differentiated strategies and learning about how to develop a product based on need and customer discovery. Tell us about that process, Toi, in your experiences, about the power of project-based social learning through the lens of entrepreneurship education.
Well, I don't think you can really learn any other way. I like to say you can't learn to swim in the library, but I'm
Totally.
actually wrong about that because I'm taking a scuba class and it's actually in the basement. The pool is in the basement of a library. So it turns out not
Right.
correct, not all the way correct, but you get the point.
We get the point.
Yeah. First of all, I love Nifty. In fact, I've been working very closely with them for the past couple of weeks. We're putting a project together. I'm very, very excited about it. And they're probably going to do a track for teachers at our upcoming conference, hopefully, and that's going to be in February, but not in stone yet. So when I was a career tech principal, that was part of that shift that I started to understand what lit kids up and what really was important about experiential learning. Because we're in a very rural town, and I would go to these meetings with the high schools, and they would just basically trash some of the kids that were coming to my building because they were getting into trouble and doing these things and they were miserable. And then they would come to me and I'd be like, he's awesome. I just put a nail gun in his hand and he is wonderful. Like, I don't have any issues with these kids. And we would have a graduation ceremony and the kids would stand up and say, this is the only reason I come to school. And why? Because they're actually doing something that is project-based, it's relevant, and there's meaning to it. And most of these classes, if you're familiar with vocational ed, they're already being entrepreneurs. They're building houses, like literally building houses that they sell and fixing the community's cars. And they're going in and into the hospitals as CNAs. And I mean, just really relevant things. And when you take that and bring it into the traditional academic curriculum, it does the same thing. It lights these kids up. And entrepreneurship and those mindsets are really just those mindsets that you have to do experiential learning, to put yourself out there. You need to experience falling flat on your face and getting back up so that you know how to pivot and you know that it's okay. And we, by and large, in our education system, even still, we're getting better, but even still, we're in the traditional system, we're pushing everyone to university, which is fine if that's what you want to do. I did it all day long. But it's not necessarily where you need to go. And kids sometimes get stigmatized if that's not their path. But regardless, those mindsets are going to help you no matter what you do. At the end of the day, my job is not to produce a bunch of entrepreneurs. If that's great, if it happens, but I can't track that. That's, they could do that when they're 40 and I'm getting them when they're in third grade, but it's building that confidence and mindsets and those skills so that no matter what they do, they're going to be okay. And just like talking about when we were talking about the medical stuff, you build up those mindsets and that resiliency, and you're like, okay, I can deal with this bump in my job right now. I can deal with some hard stuff because I know I have the confidence to pivot because I've had to before.
And I think when we've talked about this a lot, and what I think is so cool about EntreEd, I mean, right now we're talking a lot about kids, of course, fine. But you help create this entrepreneurial mindset in students, yes, but also teachers and administrators, because they need it too, And so you're really affecting the whole community. And again, one of the things we've worked on and talked about is that fine, it's entrepreneurship. That's one thing. But again, what entrepreneurship offers is a way of thinking. And can you kind of describe, maybe at each level, or your favorite, one of these aha moments, the light bulb went off for a student, for a teacher, or for an administrator?
Yeah. Well, I have this one that's just near and dear to my heart because she just delighted my soul. We had a young lady, and it was in a high school, and this is we have actually have an interview video of her. It's awesome. That she was one of these kids who flipped off the principal in the building, ran like she self describes herself. She was a mess. And somehow this guidance counselor, also guidance counselor slash, I think social studies teacher, got her, and the teacher was part of our teacher, kind of our teacher training cohort, if you will, at that time, and got her into this entrepreneurship project. And what this group of high school students did is they organized, they basically were like my little master teachers. I didn't know this was going to happen, but they organized, they got us in to do professional development for the entire county, all the elementary schools, middle school, high school. Then they organized entrepreneurial events and activities at all of these schools and ended up putting together this unbelievable market day at the end of the school year that had every single school in the county participating. It was standing room only. Like it was like a rock concert, and kids were selling things like the sweet little elementary school kids had, some jewelry and things. And this wasn't just like oh, I'm going to sell this for $1 because the teacher told me I should sell it for $1. Like these kids actually understood why they were selling something for $1 or $1.50. It was like, because this is what my materials cost, and this is what, and I here's my value proposition. Like any of these kids could talk to me like they were legit entrepreneurs starting a business. But I interviewed this group of high schoolers at the end, and this young lady was crying. She's like, if it wasn't for this experience, I was not heading to college. I was not heading into the workforce. I was probably heading to jail. And she's like, I think I'm going to try community college now. She actually enrolled. It was like, she's in healthcare now. Wow. So it was just really cool. And what happens with EntreEd, it's kind of like Reagan's trickle down economics in a way. It's like trickle down entrepreneurship. So sometimes when we train, principals and get them to understand what we're doing, they get excited and they see the potential of how this, just making these little steps, like atomic habits, right? You're making these little steps and these little start with one project, one thing in a classroom. And they see how it can fundamentally transform, like shift the culture in their school. And they can see from some of our examples how that just makes schools so much better for everybody. Kids want to be there. And when the principal allows the teachers to take some agency and develop these entrepreneurial projects in their, math classroom, science classroom, whatever, the teachers are now empowered and they feel good and they're excited about doing these projects. And then, wouldn't you know it, it trickles down into the students, and the students are excited. And it really does. It truly shifts what schools can look like. And it makes, we've never had a teacher or an administrator come back and be like, yeah, we tried that thing. That was garbage. We've never had that happen. It's always like, yes, how do I do more? How do I level up? How do I make this bigger? And so year over year, the schools do a little bit more and a little bit more. And then one day everybody wakes up and goes, oh my gosh, this is an amazing place to work and to be. So that's
trickle down entrepreneurship.
True. I like that. And we're doing a lot of research here at Penn's Graduate School of Education on this notion, Josh, that you raised and Toi, you reinforced, and that is the power and the importance of the teacher in all this. The great Caitlin Donnelly wrote in Alive in the Swamp, what's key to digital and online and next generation learning is the integration of 3 prongs. One is the application of the learning has to be super engaging. It has to be fun. And we talked about this. It has to light up the student, a Fortnite or a Minecraft-like experience. It has to be pedagogically aligned. You mentioned that, Toi, as well, that a lot of the things that you're seeing is based on standards, right? Outcomes, standards, and expectations that as the student goes through a project that lights them up in an engaging way, that there will be an outcome that can be measured. And third, and this is really a critical one, is that it's easy to adopt, that a teacher can wrap their arms around it and implement it through the instructional episodes of their classroom. There's a question here, and that is, if that's the three-pronged attack, engagement, pedagogical alignment, and easy to adopt with teacher interfaces and teacher training, easy teacher training, what can we do to make entrepreneurship education more institutionalized, more core, and not peripheral, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that, because that rolls back into when Josh asked about some challenges. That has forever been the challenge for us because entrepreneurship is a tricky thing to measure. How do you measure it? Especially, universities are getting some new ways to measure it. I did my dissertation on one of their methods, one of their metrics. But how do you measure the impact of entrepreneurship education in third grade? If you can't measure it as, how many students become entrepreneurs or start businesses, because
Yeah.
you the most long longitudinal study ever. But we do try to, we have a lot of research efforts starting and going on right now. And how do we measure it? Several people do have, like Nifty has their mindset index, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
We also work with Certiport that has an entrepreneurship and small business certification. But again, that's for a specific subset of students. One of the impacts we're trying to wrap our heads around right now is how, does bringing entrepreneurship into your classroom increase student engagement? Absolutely. So we can measure that. Does it increase grades? We're not quite able to measure that, but like anecdotally, teachers have told us that they've had kids that were struggling, that when they started doing these experiential learning projects and bringing in entrepreneurship, it changed the way, it changed the motivation, which changed the grades. Because I now want to be here. I see the value of being in this building all day. I love this class. And so we've seen it anecdotally, but to measure it it's tricky. It's a tricky space. The teacher PD, at least on our end, we've figured that out. Like, nobody gets out of our our professional development without a smile on their face, and they're like dancing out the door and they want more. It's hilarious. I'm just like, we take these teachers through several different experiences using design-based thinking as a framework and show them what they could do in a classroom. And it's awesome. And they walk out of there ready. It's one day. They can take more. We have several additional trainings and master teacher certifications and things, but they can legitimately go to one day of professional development and walk out of there in hand, like their own designed plan for what they're going to do to bring entrepreneurship into the classroom. And I forgot what the third one was, John.
The third one was how easy it is for teachers to implement. So the fidelity of the professional learning process, that at the end of the professional learning, the teacher says, I can implement this. I can actually make this work with my scope and sequence, or my instructional designs, or my instructional episodes. So
yeah, that's exactly what we do.
Sounds that way.
They, like I said, they walk out of there with their plan. And you know what's probably one of the coolest things about our professional development, because we specifically are curriculum agnostic. We don't, like, that's why we support people like Nifty, because we'll have a training. We show teachers how to do this in your classroom, regardless of what you teach. Here's some ideas. Here's the alignment to math standards. We've aligned our standards to math and science and ELA standards. But at the end of the day, there's inevitably someone that says, okay, this is great. I understand you're not pushing a curriculum down my throat, but where's the curriculum?
I get it.
Yeah. And so when that happens, I can point them in the direction of one of our partners who does amazing things like Nifty. But what's really cool is that we have, elementary, middle school, every single school that we've ever worked with, does this a little bit differently, which makes it really fun. We have schools that every teacher does something in their classroom. We have schools where all the math teachers get together and do something, and the next year they switch, and the English language arts teachers. The middle schools are probably the coolest kind of model. A lot of our middle schools, because they share students, there'll be a team of teachers that shares a group of students, so they can build a cross-curricular project or projects that have this overarching entrepreneurship umbrella, so that they're doing a little piece of this project in each class, and it's entrepreneurial. And that's really cool, because that model starts to dissipate the silos in middle school, where you're like, okay, I'm in math, I put my math hat on. Okay, done with math. Now I'm going to go and put my science hat on. And when you have a cross-curricular project like that, it really brings it adds another layer to entrepreneurship too, because it's bringing this relevance and showing students the connection between all of those different subject areas, in addition to bringing in the entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial mindsets.
That's a core component of the NGSS, right? The Next Generation Science Standards is the cross-cutting nature, how it cuts across the curriculum, which is a core component of those standards, and that allows you to show that there's actual pedagogical alignment. So that's solid as well.
Toi,
yeah,
I know.
Yes, it's also engineering and design. Sorry, I didn't mean to catch you.
No problem.
I'm a big engineer.
I know, leading up to this, just because we've all been sharing, I think we were trying to figure out if we were going to record today. Were we ready? Did we want to do it? And we were like, hey, yesterday at 5, if we're ready, we're doing it and we're rolling. And I'm so glad we did. You are among friends that you could see right now. There are people out there who are your friends as well. And I know, it's vice versa. And, I would never say I know what you're experiencing, but I'm glad you shared. And I think we all have experiences that might be similar in different ways, especially as entrepreneurs. And thank you for teaching other people, A, the mindset that we have, and B, making us feel a little more normal, because we have this wonderful mindset. Go ahead, John.
Absolutely. And Toi, one of my favorites is John Doerr, who wrote a book, Measure What Matters. He works at Kleiner Perkins. He's the legendary venture capitalist. And he was once asked, what do you look for in entrepreneurs? And he said, this is his quote. I like this. It reminds me of you. What matters most is their passion. Their focus on serving a large, unmet market need with an outstanding team and disruptive innovation. Their commitment to technical excellence and obsessing on customers, not competition. Their pursuit of reasonable financings, but unreasonable, audacious goals. Their sense of urgency, their ambition, vision, confidence, and humility in putting their team first. They must be missionaries, not mercenaries. That sounds a lot like you and your passion and your vision and your mission for EntreEd. So thank you so much for sharing your story, your journey, your lessons learned. You really are an icon in this industry, and I hope you keep doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you. That's an amazing compliment. I'll take it. Thank you guys. I am just so grateful to be on here, and so grateful that I was able to share today. This has been a blast, and I'm just excited. I'm excited to see what I'm able to do and what comes out of EntreEd coming in the future. So
thank you again. Keep coming back and sharing what you're doing.
I was watching by the way, I was watching John read that, and I was just looking at you, and you could kind of see you're sitting up a little bit more for those who are watching on video. So yes, the answer is I will get you that quote, and you can play it, post it, put it on your mirror. You rock. Thank you for coming.
You deserve wall. I could stick it on this wall here.
We'll put a new mural, and as long as you just put breaking the grade, somewhere in there, so we get a little plug. But listen, seriously, thank you for being on. You rock, and I look forward to working with you in the future more and more.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thanks for listening, Breakers.